40 years ago, Eddy O'Connell passed away. This portrait hangs in the lobby of Carroll College Administration Building, named O'Connell Hall, honoring Eddy O'Connell. He was a major benefactor of Carroll College, a real friend of Carroll, as well as one of the most remarkable businessmen who ever operated out of Helena, Montana. Eddy O'Connell created an empire of 15 Eddy's bakeries, serving the Northwest. Hi, I'm Bob Henkel. I worked for Eddy O'Connell for 13 years, handling his bakery advertising. I learned a lot from him and owe him a lot. That's why on this 40th anniversary of Eddy O'Connell's passing, with the great cooperation of the Helena Civic Television, I'd like to share with you a film documentary of my version of Eddy O'Connell Remembered. In the old days, some adventurous kids ran off and joined the circus. Well, at the age of 20, in a way, Eddy O'Connell did just that. He moved from Parker, Nebraska to Cody, Wyoming in 1904, 1 year out of high school, to work for Colonel Bill Cody and his Wild West show. He also managed Cody's 3 hotels. The Irma Hotel was called the Gem just outside of Yellowstone Park. Eddy worked closely with Bill Cody's sister, who ran the hotel operations. Later, he was also involved in Colonel Bill Cody's Wild West show, developing programs and publicity on the life of Colonel Bill Cody. He was helping prepare for the upcoming spring tour. The act was to open at Madison Square Garden. Instead, Eddy decided to leave showbiz in favor of the hospitality service. In January 1907, Eddy O'Connell was hired as one of the desk clerks at the newly reopened and elaborately furnished 86-room Broadwater Hotel. It closed with the death of Colonel Broadwater, with new owners being James Breen and F. Augusta Heinze of Butte. Pictured is a rear view of the hotel. Electric trolleys took visitors from downtown Helena to the hotel. The 150 by 350 mineral hot pool attracted visitors from all over the world. It was promoted as America's largest indoor swimming pool, but it turned out to be a financial failure. The Broadwater was closed in October 1907, and Eddy was fired for the first and only time in his life. In early 1908, when he was 24, Eddy O'Connell was hired as the manager for the newly rebuilt Montana Club, which burned down in 1904. He won the job over experienced managers who applied because Eddy volunteered to work for 0 salary. The new building had 35 rooms in the present Grand Lounge. Eddy took a leave of absence in the spring of 1909 to try out a new business. Eddy and his brother Frank, a baker, opened a bakery in Missoula. The O'Connell family were bakers in Ireland. That spring, Missoula was a boomtown, with thousands of people arriving in Missoula, competing with the free 160-acre land parcels in the Flathead Valley. For 3 months, they could not bake enough bread, which, by the way, sold for 3 cents a loaf. Only 5 out of 100 people won drawings for free land. It was a land grab, with a one-time rush to find your choice spot to put your name on it. Bread sales diminished when the land boom was over. Eddy returned to Helena in the late 1909. Helena had a population of 14,000 people. A quart of milk, 3 cents, and a gallon of gasoline, 7 cents. An entry-level job for a college graduate was 15 cents an hour. Pictured is a photo of what Helena looked like at that time. Fire took many of the buildings along Main Street. This is the north view of South Main. This is the south view of South Main. Eddy put the doors of the Montana Club behind him and left to open the Capitol Cafe at 105 North Main Street in Helena. He partnered with Eddie Gallivan, who was former chef at the Broadwater. The newspaper editor wrote an article about the two Eddys opening a cafe, and he reported, of course, they will call it Eddy's Cafe. And they did just that. A steaming, distinctive coffee cup was used in the cafe sign. Here is Eddy O'Connell describing how he got into the bakery business from a 1967 interview with Montana broadcaster Ed Craney.
Well, in the cafe, we wanted to have better French bread and better hard rolls. And in order to do it at that time,
was that the start of your famous Eddy's hard rolls?
That's right. That's the start. That's the start.
And this was 1913.
When we went into the baking end of the business. 1910.
In the 1910, when you went in the cafe, right. And the rolls really started then in the cafe.
That's right. That's right. And
they've been going for 57 years then.
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. And along with it came the day when people came in to buy rolls and a loaf of bread, and I said to Mr. Galvin, I think
you sold bread then too?
At our own counter, and we wrapped it in a newspaper.
No.
We didn't even have anything to
See, in those days you didn't cut bread.
Oh no, no sliced bread, no cut bread, no nothing. No wrappers.
No, just wrapped it in newspaper.
Yes, or gave it to them the way it was. They could put it in their handbag like they do in France.
They do that over in Europe now.
That's right. That's right.
Well, times have changed.
Yes.
Well, then you started in selling rolls right there in Eddy's Cafe.
That's right.
Well,
that's right. Then, in order to get along, and I said to Mr. Galvin, I think we ought to be able to take on some of these retail outlets. At that time, we had in Helena some very good stores, Reineck and Company up on State Street, R.C. Wallace on Main Street, Turner and Company over on across from what's now the YWCA. And he said, well, if you think so, but I don't like it. That looks
He was doing the cooking.
Yes, yes. He thought
you were just doing the selling.
Yeah, he said, I think we shouldn't do it. We got lots to do now. And I said, well, but we're getting along all right, and the problem is to keep getting along.
Well, who won out?
Well, he said finally, well, go ahead, hoping, I think, that I wouldn't get any accounts. But I went out and
sold everybody in town.
That's right.
And then, following that, in 1913, you opened what has become Eddy's Bakeries.
Yeah, that's right. In what is now the present day, the bakery building.
Here
we put in a large brick oven to make the real type of French bread.
How many loaves of bread could you make a day then?
Oh, I suppose
back in 13.
2,000.
In 1913, O'Connell and Gallivan bought the Grand Central Hotel across the street from the cafe. They changed the name to Eddy's Hotel and moved the cafe to the ground floor. The bakery was located in the hotel basement, but the bread demand soon outgrew the facilities. The original cafe continued operating as a creamery cafe. Eddy also operated the Eddy Bar next to the hotel. Eddie Gallivan continued to operate the original Eddy Cafe until 1940. The bakery business was booming, so later in the year, the Eddy's bakery operations moved around the corner from the hotel basement into the ground floor of 18 Edward Street. It was called the Eddy Steam Bakery. The bakery continued here until 1956. Here is Eddy's first newspaper ads for the steam bakery bread. Eddy O'Connell was credited with helping to bring the Federal Reserve Bank to Helena in 1921. For 17 years, the bank, with its marble interior, was located across the street from the Eddy's Bakery. For a short period of time, John Dillinger stayed in the imperial rooms above the bakery, said to be a brothel. Needless to say, security was increased during his short stay. Later, The Eddy's Bakery general offices occupied the second floor space until 1972. Sage Advertising was located in the ground floor, former bakery space from 1960 to 1972. Across the street, the Marlowe Theater was built and operated there for nearly 40 years. The Union Bank was next door, later to become the Montana Power Building. All of the Edward Street buildings were destroyed with urban renewal in 1974, with the exception of the Livestock Building. Here is Edward Street today with the Holiday Inn parking lot where the Eddy's Bakery building was located. In 1919, Eddy's purchased this great mansion on Helena's west side. It was built for a steamboat captain who worked in Fort Benton. The builders were Persilo and Elmsley, students of Frank Lloyd Wright. Eddy married Eve Weaver in 1921. Eddy made his home here for 53 years. It was passed on to his son James II and his wife Merle, and enjoyed by Eddy O'Connell's 6 grandchildren. In 1919, Eddy sold the Eddy's Hotel to concentrate on expanding the bakery business. It was renamed the Harvey Hotel. It burned down in 1967. In 1919, Eddy began buying small bakeries and expanded his bakery operations beyond Helena. Competitors began to sell cakes with their bread, so in 1929, Eddy opened the Old Plantation Cake Bakery on North Park Street. Here it is now with several businesses occupying the bakery space. These cakes were sold in all 15 of the Eddy's Bakery markets until 1977. Small cakes for children, lunch boxes, were the biggest sellers at 10 cents a package. In September 1929, panic hit. The economy tanked, and the cake bakery was unprofitable for several years. This cornerstone still remains on the north corner of our building expansion. Eddy took advantage of the times by buying out on the cheap, bankrupt and hard-pressed bakeries. He created a chain of bakeries, 11 more bakeries in the next 27 years. Great Falls in 1919, Missoula 1921, Butte in 1923, Havre in 1926, Yakima and Grand Forks in 1938, Pocatello in 1937, Boise and Aberdeen in 1938, Minneapolis in 1943, and Superior, Wisconsin in 1946. Stock in the bakeries was owned by Eddy and his long-term partner, brother Frank O'Connell, who acted as the treasurer. Eddy was a soft-spoken, very cordial person. He had a shrewd business sense and was known affectionately by his friends as the Velvet Hammer, or to some people, especially employees, a cream puff filled with concrete. Sliced bread was a big innovation for the bakery business and greater convenience for consumers. Here's one of the first bread slicing machines, and later a more modern bread slicer in the Eddy plant. It was just a few years since the vogue of the sliced bread loaf hit the popular fancy when on January 18, 1942, the Federal Department of Agriculture, Food Administration, ordered as a war measure for bakeries to cease and desist selling loaves of sliced bread. Housewives were offered a new slogan, "Win the war, slice your own." It was to save costs because flour prices had risen, so there would be no price increase in bread during the war years. Fresh bread sandwiches were a big favorite of the population. At that time, a 1.5 pound white loaf of bread cost 13 cents. Eddy's newspaper ads featured a firmer bread loaf for easier slicing. Bread was enriched with extra vitamins and minerals. This became a big selling point. Super enriched Eddy's Pandandy bread was the top seller. 2 2/3 more vitamins and minerals. No ration coupons needed for Eddy's bread. These were featured in ads. In the early 1940s, Eddy's was on the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank Board and for years on the Union Bank Board. He was president of the Helena Chamber of Commerce for 2 terms. There just wasn't much going on in Helena that Eddy was not involved in. Eddy and Frank O'Connell also ventured into other businesses, buying the former Marks and Madden ranches in Broadwater County. They owned 200 cattle and 10,000 sheep. The ranch expanded to eventually become the state's largest wool operator. The RV Ranch west of Helena on the Continental Divide is a massive spread and still remains a family property. Over the years, Eddy's bread became a household name across Montana and the 8-state area. This ad in a reverse engraving plate features that Eddy's bread is the largest seller in the Northwest. Eddy's was a strong believer in advertising. Here is one of his early ads. In the 1930s and 1940s, newspaper ads were the major advertising medium. Ads featured extra nutrition at no extra cost, and Eddy's homogenized bread to stay fresh longer. You can still see faded Eddy's bread signs on the side of buildings. They're called phantom signs. Here is the one on Last Chance Gulch in Helena. Recently is repainted and distressed to simulate a phantom sign. The restoration was done by a company specializes in this type of painting. The cost was underwritten by the O'Connell family. Very appropriate in the 40th year of Eddy O'Connell's death. Eddy's was famous for its metal signs of all shapes and sizes. Eddy's bread, better by far, was the selling slogan for the time. Everywhere Eddy's was sold, you'd see fences with Eddy's signs on them, even on the front yards of homes. This metal rotating Eddy's bread loaf was as large as a bread truck. In the 1950s and 60s, outdoor billboard signs were used featuring First Choice Eddy's Pandandy bread, Olympic meal bread, and all butter potato bread. Eddy sponsored movies for children like the Lone Ranger serials. Television stations began broadcasting in the mid-1950s, with Eddy's bread sponsoring Cisco Kid television shows. Here is